Yeah, we can start now.
Okay.
Yeah. So, good day, everybody. We are going to start the module two of our previous module one training course that was on the same topic, understanding the process approach to quality management, in which you have understood from Dr. Nigel that what is mean by process mapping and how to start it with the PDCA cycle and with the ISO perspective. Uh, we welcome you and we are thankful for Dr. Nigel to always joining us and giving us the knowledge for University of Sierra Leone. And we are hopeful as soon as the COVID situation would be fine, we would be able to invite Dr. Nigel uh, directly at Sierra Leone. Yeah. And Dr. Nigel is always very happy for Sierra Leone, and he is committed. The good thing is that he is committed. Dr. Nigel, you have the detailed introduction, but recently Dr. Nigel has, I mean, elected for the next tenure into the ISO committees. Those are with respect to ISO 9000, ISO 22000, and ISO. The third, there is, I am forgetting, there is a third standard,
45,001 and
45,000.
14,000.
Yeah,
So many numbers.
so many numbers. So, I mean, lucky that Dr. Nigel is always with us. I'm just introducing the project as usual. What is this project? West Africa Competitiveness Project is uh, EU funded project, and in this project, basically, there are three components. One is the quality infrastructure services, other is value chain, and third is the enabling business atmosphere and the business policies. Uh, the basically the quality management certification program that we are going to establish at the University of Sierra Leone. This is with respect to the first component, that is quality infrastructure services. In this entire program, we are going to support the three value chain as well. That is with respect to cassava, palm oil, and cocoa. We are doing different program for these value chain, starting from the harvesting, post harvesting, and farmer productivity techniques. Uh, Next, please. This is basically project. We are promoting this project and executing this project with the UNIDO 3C approach. That is with respect to first develop the competitiveness and then connect this and recently basically uh, conformity to the international and the regional standard and then connect them to the regional and the global market. Uh, I would request Dr. Nigel to start from the module two, and then we will see how we will reach up to the assignment that will be the final assignment with respect to this module two. Over to Dr. Nigel, please.
Okay, thanks, Shorkat, and it's a pleasure to be back with you all again. You will hopefully remember that in Module 1, we looked at the idea as what is the process, how we map out processes, how do we describe processes. What we're going to do in Module 2 is take that one step further and think about how we might manage interacting processes as a system. We'll look at the ISO 9001 requirements for quality management system processes and maybe talk a little bit about the implications for different kinds of organizations. So that I hope that what you will see is that as we gradually progress through this sequence of looking at the process approach, you will in fact be already starting to build your quality management system. And hopefully you will be able to see how all of this fits together. So first of all, we need to understand, and I think I've shown you this slide in previous courses, what is a quality management system? Well, the official definition from the ISO 9000 vocabulary standard, quality management system is a set of interrelated or interacting elements of an organization. In other words, people, equipment, resources, that are needed to establish policies and objectives. In other words, what you want to achieve, and then to manage the processes to achieve those objectives. So the focus is on managing the process. It's not on writing procedures or writing work instructions and documenting everything. Of course, documentation is important. And a good way to describe your processes will be through, for example, flowcharts, as we saw in the first part of this module, or written instructions, standard operating procedures, or whatever. But before we can do that, we need to understand the way that the processes in our organization work and the way that they fit together. So we touched on this in the first module, that processes are not necessarily linear. They don't follow an automatic horizontal sequence. There may be some inputs from other parts of the organization, from other processes, in fact. So when we look at, for example, process for delivering a short course for industry, that is a process. But that couples in with the process for marketing those short courses. It couples in with the process for developing the materials to present in those short courses, with the criteria for selecting applicants for the short courses, and so on. And so we need to recognize that many processes needed for the quality management system to operate are interfunctional in nature. And so we need to change the mindset in many organizations. If we think about purchasing, most organizations buy something or the other at some time. Whether it's components, or whether it's raw materials, or whether it's subcontracted services, or whatever. We shouldn't think of purchasing as a department. That's the purchasing department's responsibility. Much of that process may actually be within the purchasing department, but we have to think about it as a process. There are other components to that process. Who is actually wanting to use whatever it is that's being bought? It may be a maintenance department in a factory. It may be you as lecturers who are wanting to use a new laptop computer or some new classroom installations or whatever. So the purchasing process actually begins with whoever is wanting to buy something. And maybe you put forward a purchase requisition or a request for quotation. And then somebody has to look at that and say, who might the good suppliers be? If it's a critical piece of equipment that you are buying, then there may be a supplier evaluation process that is initiated at that stage, where somebody goes along, possibly if it's a very critical piece of equipment you're buying, they go along and they actually do an audit of the supplier. Or they ask the question, does this supplier have ISO 9001 certification? Does that give us enough confidence? And so the process then finds its way probably into the purchasing department, together with maybe some quality supplier evaluations, the part of the organization that's responsible for those. And then possibly the finance department gets involved in actually processing the payment for that piece of equipment or service that's being purchased. And then finally, there will be some kind of incoming inspection. It may not be called inspection, but whoever is receiving the process is asking themselves the question, Did I get what I expected? Did we as an organization get what we paid for? If so, then that goes as a little tick against that supplier. That supplier, it builds up a picture that that supplier is a trustworthy supplier, that we can get what we want from them. And maybe that speeds up the process next time we seek to make a similar purchase. Or not. It may be that the product that the supplier is providing is no good. And so we have to issue a complaint. And that leads us into a complaints process. And maybe we have to return the product to the supplier. And so all of these fit together in a kind of jigsaw puzzle. And likewise for training. Training is not about having a training department. It's about having a process for identifying the needs for training, for developing suitable training processes, delivery, course materials, and so on, assessing whether the training has been effective or not, and involving people, different departments, to nominate people to take part in that training. And likewise, we can think about sales. It's not just a department, it's a process. And by considering it as a process, we start to do what Dr. Deming, the greatest guru of quality in the last century, emphasized. We break down interdepartmental barriers. And we stop thinking with that silo mentality that I am important, my department is important. No, we have to think about the organization as a whole, and we have to help each other to operate more effectively and more efficiently. So most of these processes involve a number of different departments or functions. For some reason, my computer has frozen. Let me see what's going on here. Okay, here we go. Okay. So this is a typical interfunctional process flowchart. And it basically just spells out in a little bit more detail what I said earlier. So an interfunctional process, it maybe starts, let's think about a replacement component for an air conditioning unit that is important in your lecture theatres. It may start with somebody saying, hey, the air conditioning is not working. So we need to put in a request for maintenance. And so we request a maintenance to come along, and maintenance here is Department C, and they have to have a decision. Can they fix it? Maybe they can fix it, and so they come along and they try to fix the broken air conditioner. If they're successful, then it goes to the end of the process. If they need some spare parts, maybe they are going to then request to the purchasing department, and there may be a review meeting, there may be a written instruction telling them how to issue a purchase request, what's important, probably have a standard form to fill out that they then send to the purchasing department. Purchasing department carries out the purchasing process and then delivers it back to maintenance, who maybe have a record of the inspection, is it okay, and the process ends there. So that's what we mean when we talk about looking beyond departmental boundaries and thinking about the process. Because each individual process, we talked about this a lot in the first part of this course, each individual process has inputs and it has outputs. The process itself can be managed. Whenever I talk about managing a process, what do I mean? I mean plan, do, check, act. That's how you manage things. That's how we manage our personal lives. It's how we manage our professional lives. It's how we manage individual processes, and it's how we manage systems. So each individual process can be managed using the plan, do, check, act, and deliver outputs. Those outputs of process A may provide inputs into process C. That output, it may be in the form of information, it may be in the form of a tangible product, or it may be in the form of a person. If this is the training process, for example, the input will be somebody who doesn't have the necessary skills and knowledge to carry out their job. They go through the training process, and the output, hopefully, is someone who is now competent to do their job, and they go to do their day-to-day work in process C. So we can see how all of this fits together, and we can consider that the output of process A here, that process C is actually the customer of process A, because they are receiving the results of process A's work. And then process C has possibly one or more customers itself. And if we can understand the relationship between these processes, are these people talking to each other? Does the process C, maybe the output of process C is a report. Let's say that report has been developed and process C has delivered that same report. Maybe it's a budget projection, maybe it's some financial figures or something, and they've produced that report every week for the last 10 years. And they deliver that report to their internal customer, who may be the finance department, and every week they supply that report. And it takes them time and money and energy. Well, have they actually spoken? Do they communicate on a regular basis with the finance department? The finance department may say, I never actually use this. I never actually read it. We don't need this information anymore. We've got other ways of getting that information. And so we find that process C is actually wasting its time, and it's wasting efforts, and it's wasting energy. On the other hand, process D may be very frustrated and say, well, process C, they never give me what I want. The information they send me is useless, but it could be so much better. Well, if we work on these interfaces between the processes, that's when we start to look at optimizing the system as a whole. So if we can do that, and if we can talk to each other and break down these interdepartmental silos, then we will find that overall we are being more effective and efficient in delivering products and services to our collective external customer. And so each of these individual processes can be managed using Plan, Do, Check, Act, but also we have to look at the Plan, Do, Check, Act, this bigger cycle here, at the system level. Is the system working? Are the various processes interacting as effectively as they might? We can do that by using tools like internal audits. And we'll be talking more about internal audits in future modules. We have one of the clauses of ISO 9001 that talks about management review, where top management takes a step back and looks at everything that's happening within the organization and asks the question, is this doing what we want it to do? Is it achieving what we want to achieve? Are our external customers happy? What about other stakeholders? It's not just about the student. It's about the future employers of the students. It's about the education ministry, who is probably defining criteria that they expect students to learn when they are at the university. It's probably about society as a whole, who hopefully expect students that come out of the University of Sierra Leone to be good people, to be well-rounded, to be good members of society. So all of this is very, very relevant to ISO 9001. But it's also very, very relevant to some of the other quality methodologies that I'm sure you've heard of. Things like Lean, Six Sigma methodology, where the key aim is to drive out waste. to drive out, eliminate any process or any activity that doesn't add value. And the best way to do that is by understanding the processes, avoiding overlaps, avoiding redundancy of processes where, maybe process E is having to do some rework on the outputs of process C here, but they've not communicated. If they were to communicate well, then process C could probably provide them with a better output that would help the system as a whole to be more effective and more efficient. So when we start now to map this out, we can see a typical example here of how a management system might look. Up at the top, we will have the sort of management related processes. What's the policy of the organization? What are the objectives? The check in the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, the management review, what resources are needed. All of this will depend on the context of the organization, which is actually the very first requirement of ISO 9001. Understand the context. So this is a generic example of a restaurant, but is it a fast food restaurant? Or is it a very sophisticated, high-class restaurant in a 5-star hotel? The actual way in which the processes are managed will be different depending on those factors. And then we have here what we would typically call the operations processes. The processes involved in delivering products and services to the customer. So we may have somebody defining what's the menu, purchasing ingredients. We have an input there from a supplier evaluation process, then prepare the food, serve the food and drink. Of course, here is going to be the waiter or the waitress receiving the customer, asking the customer what they want. Table preparation. And then after the customer has eaten and drunk as much as they want or as much as they can afford, then there is a process here for payment of bill and some kind of customer satisfaction monitoring. It doesn't have to be a complex process. In a small restaurant, it may be as simple as the owner of the restaurant. As happened to me 2 days ago, I went to a new restaurant that I'd not been to before, a small family-run restaurant. And as I was leaving, I just paid the bill and the owner said, "It's a pleasure to see you here tonight, sir. How was your meal? Was everything to your satisfaction? Did you enjoy it?" And it was actually an excellent meal. So I said, "Yes, thank you. We'll be back." "Okay, pleasure to see you. Thank you. Bye-bye." That is actually a very simple customer satisfaction monitoring process. So then down here, we have a number of other, what we might call support processes. We have things like monitoring and measurement. Is the food cooked properly? Are the portion sizes correct? Cleaning, hygiene, competence, awareness and training, for example, of the cooks and the people who are working in the kitchen. Are they aware of food safety regulations? Do they understand the importance if somebody comes to the restaurant and says, "I have an allergy"? Maybe I have a peanut allergy. And if I eat peanuts, then it can kill me. So are those people aware of what relates to their particular needs and expectations of the customers? And of course, things like document control. Is the menu up to date? Do we have the latest versions of the recipe? If somebody suggests in the kitchen an improvement to a recipe, how do we capture that? And how do we incorporate that improvement into the way we do it next time around? So this is just a very, very simple example of how the different processes start to hang together. So if we now look at ISO 9001, let's see how this prepares us for ISO 9001 management system processes. This is taken straight from ISO 9001, very, very simple linear process where we have what I explained in the first part of this course, sources of inputs, what ISO 9001 calls predecessor processes, those processes whose outputs form the inputs into another process. We have those inputs may be matter, in other words, raw materials, it may be components, it may be energy, or it may be information. They then feed into the starting point for a number of interrelated activities. That's what a process is, a series of interrelated activities, and the endpoint. And that we have the outputs and we have the receivers of the outputs, which we know are the customers. They may be external customers or they may be internal customers. And it's possible to monitor and check the performance of these processes at all these stages by looking at by evaluating the sources of the inputs, the previous processes. It may be a supplier evaluation, it may be a supplier audit. We can look at the actual outputs from these predecessor processes, which are inputs into our process. We can monitor and measure performance during our actual activities, and we can monitor the outputs of those processes. And then we can ask the customers, did that meet your needs and expectations? Was that all satisfactory? So when we start now to look at ISO 9001, in the introductory clauses, clause 0.3, not requirements yet, but the description of the general approach of ISO 9001, it talks about the process approach. The process approach involves the systematic definition and management of processes and their interactions, so as to achieve the intended results in accordance with the quality policy and the strategic direction of the organization. Why does the organization exist? Is it public? Is it private? Is it for profit? Is it not for profit? What are the needs and expectations of its overall customers? And then we can manage the processes and the system as a whole using the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, as I explained before, with an overall focus on risk-based thinking. So how much planning do we need to do for that particular process? Do we need a lot of very heavy, detailed work instructions or procedures? Do we need specific competence requirements for the people who are going to be carrying out those processes? If so, that may be applicable for a high-risk process. Or it may be something where we say, this is very simple. Just do it however you want to do it. Particularly in service organizations, hotels, airlines, and so on, we want to allow the people who are on the front line dealing with customers, we want to allow them some flexibility. We want to allow them to be spontaneous with customers sometimes, not just reading from a predetermined script. And we also want to take advantages of opportunities as they arise and prevent undesirable results by mitigating the process to avoid those results from happening or to minimize the impact. So I think these words from Dr. Deming, very, very important. If you can't describe what you are doing as a process, then you don't know what you're doing. And so there is a certain satisfaction and discipline in mapping out processes. Don't rush it. Learn. You know, you may, as you map out the process, you say, do we really do it this way? That's a bit stupid. There's a much easier way to do it. And we can talk to each other within the different departments and try to figure out the most effective and the most efficient way to do things. So I think that's a good point at which to make a short break in the recording of this video. And when we come back, we'll continue talking about the quality management system and its processes.